The queen pulled me into an embrace. Leaving the court speechless, Leo stood at the entrance of the grand hall, the scent of alien perfumes and polished stone filling the air. He had never been in a place so majestic, so overwhelmingly beautiful. The Quelorian kingdom was like nothing he had ever imagined. Towering spires, glowing gardens, and statues that seemed to watch his every move, all of it was designed to inspire awe. Yet in the midst of all the splendor, Leo felt a sense of unease. He had been sent here, not as a visitor, but as a representative of humanity. His mission was simple, to foster peace and cooperation between the alien species and his home planet. But in this alien world, the stakes were higher than he could have ever prepared for. As he walked through the hall, every step echoed. The walls were adorned with intricate murals depicting the history of the Quelorians, and the glow of bioluminescent plants illuminated the entire space. At the far end of the hall, seated upon an ornate throne, was the Queen. Queen Althea of Queloria. Her presence was unmistakable, tall, regal, with eyes that seemed to pierce through the very fabric of reality. Leah had heard of her, of course. She was renowned across the galaxy for her wisdom and her control over her kingdom. But what struck him most was her aura, an air of command that was impossible to ignore. It was clear to Leo that this was not just a queen, this was a force of nature. The alien courtiers surrounding her were equally imposing. They came from various species, each one more extraordinary than the last. Some were tall and insect-like, their exoskeletons shimmering in the light. Others were sleek and serpentine, their eyes glowing with an unnatural hue. And there in the center stood the queen. Leo's heart raced as he took his place in front of her throne. The room fell silent, and all eyes turned to him. This was it, the moment he had been preparing for his entire life. The diplomatic mission that could change the course of human history. And yet, as he stood there facing the queen, a strange calm washed over him. He had spoken in front of crowds before, but something about this moment felt different. Queen Althea regarded him for a long moment, her eyes narrowing slightly, as if assessing him. Leo couldn't tell whether she was impressed or merely intrigued. He had heard that the Quelorians were a deeply intellectual species, and their queen was no exception. She had a reputation for being methodical, calculating, but also compassionate when it mattered most. "Human," her voice rang out clear and commanding. "You are bold to come here. What is it you hope to accomplish?" Leo had rehearsed this speech 1,000 times in his mind, but now that the moment had arrived, the words seemed to slip away. He took a deep breath and began. "We are not so different, Your Majesty," he said, his voice steady despite the nerves bubbling inside him. "Humanity may be new to the galactic stage, but we've learned from our mistakes. We've learned that unity is the only path forward. The divisions that have plagued our world can no longer be ignored, and I believe that if we work together, we can create something truly remarkable. We can build bridges, not walls." The Queen's eyes softened ever so slightly, but her expression remained unreadable. Leo pressed on. "We know that peace cannot be achieved through isolation. The universe is too vast, too interconnected. But if we can come together, if we can set aside our differences, we can face the challenges ahead. And humanity, despite its flaws, is willing to learn from those who have walked this path before us." A murmur of agreement rippled through the court, but Leo's focus was entirely on the Queen. For a moment, there was a long silence. He had no idea what she was thinking. The weight of her gaze was almost too much to bear, but Leo stood firm. Finally, Queen Althea spoke again. "You are a brave man, Leo of Earth, but bravery alone is not enough. Do you truly understand what it takes to unite such diverse peoples? To lead them, to guide them, to make them see beyond their own interests?" Leo didn't hesitate. "I do. I've seen the damage division can do. I've seen it in my own world, and I've seen it in the universe. But I've also seen the power of understanding, of compromise. I've seen what happens when people come together, even when it seems impossible." The Queen studied him for a moment longer, her expression inscrutable. Then, to Leo's surprise, she smiled. It was a fleeting smile, barely noticeable, but it was there. "We shall see," she said cryptically. The tension in the room was palpable, and Leo couldn't help but wonder what had just transpired. He had expected this meeting to be a battle of wits, but he hadn't expected this subtle acknowledgement from the Queen. "I will give you a chance, Leo of Earth," she continued. "But know this, the road ahead will not be easy. You may not have the luxury of time, and the forces against us will not hesitate to strike." "I understand, Your Majesty," Leo said, his voice filled with resolve. But I believe in what we can achieve together, and I won't stop fighting for that vision." The queen's eyes flickered with something unreadable, and for the briefest of moments, Leo felt as if she was seeing through him into his very soul. It was a strange, unsettling sensation, but it also felt empowering. "Very well," she said, her tone softening. "You may stay for a while. Let us see if your words hold any truth." With that, she rose from her throne and began to walk toward him, her movements graceful and deliberate. The entire court held its breath. Leo could hear his own heart pounding in his chest. He had expected an exchange of words, perhaps even a stern rebuke, but he had not expected this. As Queen Althea reached him, she paused for a moment. The entire court seemed to lean in, waiting for what would come next. And then, in a gesture that left Leo speechless, she reached out and pulled him into an embrace. The court went completely silent. The shock was evident on every face. The queen, had never shown such emotion in public. She was known for her stoic and composed demeanor, a symbol of authority and power. Yet here she was, holding Leo of Earth in her arms. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Leo was caught off guard, unsure of what to do. He could feel the queen's heartbeat against his chest, and though he knew this was an unexpected move, he couldn't help but feel a strange connection to her. She wasn't just a ruler. She was someone who carried the weight of an entire kingdom on her shoulders. The moment passed as quickly as it came, and the queen stepped back. She looked at Leo, her expression unreadable once again. The court, still silent, was in shock, but Leo could see something in the queen's eyes, something like a spark of hope, a flicker of trust. "Do not mistake this gesture, Leo of Earth," she said softly, her voice low and steady. "This is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of what could be if you truly understand the weight of your words." Leo nodded, his heart still racing. He had no idea what would come next, but he knew one thing for sure. This was only the beginning. The following days in the Quelorian palace were a blur for Leo. The grand halls, the shimmering gardens, the alien courtiers, all of it had become a strange new world, one that felt both alien and familiar. After the unexpected embrace from Queen Althea, the atmosphere around him had shifted. There was an air of curiosity, but also suspicion. The court's reaction to the queen's uncharacteristic display of affection was one of complete silence, as if the entire kingdom was holding its breath. Leo spent his time in quiet meetings with the queen, often discussing the delicate intricacies of intergalactic diplomacy. Althea was a woman of incredible intellect, her mind sharp and calculating, yet there was something beneath the surface, something more human than she often allowed herself to show. On one of these days, Leo was summoned to the royal gardens. The sun shone brightly through the vibrant, alien trees, casting colorful shadows across the ground. As he walked deeper into the garden, he noticed the queen sitting beneath a canopy of vines, her posture regal but relaxed. Her long, dark hair cascaded down her shoulders, the faintest hint of vulnerability in her eyes. She looked up as Leo approached, her gaze steady and thoughtful. "You've been spending time with the court, Leo. Have you learned anything useful about our ways?" Leo hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "I've learned a great deal. Your people are proud, highly intellectual, but also deeply divided. There is strength in that, but also a great deal of isolation. I can see how much you carry on your shoulders." Althea's lips twitched in something like a smile, but it was fleeting. "You're not wrong. The weight of leadership is heavy, and it's not always understood. But I am not without my advisors and my court. I do not carry it alone." "But you do," Leo said softly, sitting across from her. "No matter how many people surround you, you are the one who has to make the final decisions. You are the one who will bear the consequences, good or bad." The queen studied him for a long time, her eyes narrowing slightly. "And you think you know what it's like?" Leo met her gaze steadily. "I've seen what it's like to lead. I've seen what happens when decisions are made in isolation, but I've also seen what happens when people come together. When we listen to each other, when we set aside our differences." Althea's expression softened, but she didn't respond immediately. Instead, she looked out at the garden, her fingers gently brushing the leaves of a nearby plant. "You speak of unity, Leo. But unity is not always possible. People are selfish, driven by their own needs and desires. It's easy to say we should come together, but it's much harder to make it happen." Leo nodded, understanding her point. "I know it's hard. But the hardest things are often the most worth pursuing." There was a long silence between them, the only sound being the distant rustle of the leaves in the breeze. Finally, Althea spoke again, her voice quieter now. Do you believe your people are ready for such a change? Are they ready to leave behind their old ways and embrace something new? Leo took a deep breath. I think they're ready to try. We may not have all the answers, but we're willing to listen. We want to build something better, not just for ourselves, but for everyone. Althea looked at him with an unreadable expression, and for a moment Leo wondered if she would dismiss his words entirely. But instead, she nodded slowly. Perhaps, she said, but words are easy, Leo. It's the actions that will matter. Leo felt a pang of frustration. Then let's take action. Let's work together. We can start small, build trust, create meaningful exchanges, and show people that unity is possible. The Queen tilted her head, studying him carefully. You would have my trust, Leo, but that doesn't mean it will be easy. The factions in my court are restless. The alliances between the different species are fragile. If I move too quickly, I risk shattering everything. Leo leaned forward, his voice filled with determination. I'm not asking you to rush, Your Majesty. I'm asking for a chance. Just one. If we can show that working together benefits everyone, the rest will follow. For a long moment, the Queen didn't speak. Instead, she looked down at her hands, as though contemplating something deeply personal. Finally, she spoke again, her voice steady but soft. I've seen your resolve, Leo, and I see the potential in your vision, but trust is not easily given. It must be earned. I understand, Leo said quietly. But I'm here to earn it, Your Majesty, if you'll allow me. Althea's lips curled slightly upward, the faintest smile appearing once again. You are persistent, I'll give you that. Leo smiled in return, feeling a sense of quiet pride. Perhaps they weren't so different after all. Both of them were trying to bridge the gap between two worlds. Both of them were trying to create something better, something lasting. The days that followed were filled with tense yet productive discussions. Leo and Queen Althea worked closely together, forming a tentative alliance based on mutual respect. The court remained divided, with some factions openly skeptical of the human diplomat, but Leo was undeterred. He knew this was a long-term game, and he was prepared to play it. One evening, after another long day of meetings, Leo found himself alone in the palace's observation room. The view was breathtaking. The entire city of Quelloria sprawled out before him, its shining lights reflecting the soft glow of distant stars. He had never felt so small, yet so connected to something greater. The vastness of the universe, the complexity of the relationships within it, it was all both overwhelming and awe-inspiring. As Leo stared out into the distance, he felt a presence behind him. He turned to find Queen Althea standing at the entrance, her eyes searching the stars in a way that made her seem almost vulnerable. Leo, she said softly, there are moments when I wonder if I've made the right choice bringing you here. Whether I've made the right choice for my people. Leo smiled warmly. It's not about making the right choice all the time, Your Majesty. It's about the willingness to keep trying, to keep moving forward even when it seems impossible. The Queen's eyes softened, and for a brief moment, Leo saw something in her he hadn't before, a flicker of hope. Perhaps you're right, she murmured. The two of them stood there, looking out at the galaxy together. In that moment, there was an understanding between them. It wasn't complete yet, but it was the beginning of something that could change the course of both their people's futures. As the days passed, the tension in the court began to shift. There were still those who viewed Leo with suspicion, but others had started to see the potential in his words. It wasn't an overnight change, but progress was being made. Slowly but surely, the seeds of unity were being planted. Leo knew it would take time, but time he had. And with the Queen's guidance, he was determined to prove that humanity's place in the galaxy wasn't just as outsiders, but as partners in the ongoing struggle for peace. In the midst of the diplomatic talks, however, a new challenge arose. A faction of rebels, dissatisfied with the Queen's willingness to negotiate with humans, began to make their move. They were determined to disrupt the fragile alliance that had begun to form. And soon, Leo found himself caught in the middle of a brewing storm, one that would test not only his resolve but also the very future of the alliance he had worked so hard to build. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Leo had no intention of giving up. Not now, not ever. The days following Leo's conversation with Queen Althea were filled with a growing sense of urgency. There were whispers in the court, some of support and others of doubt. It was clear that the Queen's actions were not without consequence, and the delicate balance within the kingdom was beginning to shift. Leo had expected resistance, But the level of distrust among certain factions was far greater than he had anticipated. It wasn't just that some courtiers disliked the idea of working with humanity, it was that they feared it. Fear was a powerful motivator, and in the royal court of Quelloria, it was a weapon used as effectively as any blade. But Leo wasn't backing down. Every day he worked alongside Althea, offering his advice and listening to hers. They discussed trade routes, military strategies, and the social challenges the galaxy faced. But amid all this, Leo couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was at play. The tension in the court was building, and he feared it might eventually explode. One afternoon, after another grueling meeting, Leo was walking through the palace corridors when he found himself at a dead end. The hallway he had wandered into was unfamiliar, the walls adorned with strange symbols and ancient artifacts. It was clear this part of the palace was reserved for more private matters, but Leo was too curious to turn back. He continued down the path until he found a large wooden door slightly ajar. Quiet voices could be heard from within, and as he approached, he recognized one of the voices as Queen Althea, S. He hesitated for a moment, debating whether he should intrude, but his curiosity got the better of him. He gently pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was dimly lit, filled with the scent of incense and burning wood. The queen stood in front of a large, ancient map, her fingers tracing the lines of stars and planets with a quiet intensity. Around her were several advisors, their faces serious, their discussions hushed. "I'm not sure how much longer we can keep this up," one of the advisors said. "The unrest in the outer colonies is spreading. If we don't act soon, we may lose control entirely." Althea's eyes darkened, her brow furrowing as she listened. "We cannot afford to act rashly," she replied, her voice steady but filled with authority. "We must find a way to unite our people before we can even think about dealing with external threats." Leo stepped forward, unable to remain silent any longer. "But your people are divided, Your Majesty. The longer you wait, the harder it will be to bring them together. We've seen what happens when people remain divided. It leads to chaos. Perhaps now is the time to take decisive action." The room fell silent as the courtiers turned to look at Leo. Althea's gaze softened, but she didn't respond immediately. She seemed to be weighing his words carefully. "This is not a decision to be taken lightly, Leo," she said finally. "My people are proud and they are set in their ways. They don't take kindly to outsiders telling them how to rule their own kingdom." Leo met her gaze steadily. "I understand that, but sometimes the hardest thing to do is the right thing to do. You don't have to do it alone. If you want unity, you need to take risks. You need to trust those around you, even when it feels like the world is against you." For a moment, there was no response. Then, as if deciding something in her own mind, Althea turned back to her advisors. "We will meet tomorrow in the Grand Hall. Prepare the court." The next day, the atmosphere in the palace was charged. Word had spread about the Queen's plans to address the court, and there was a nervous energy that filled every corner of the hall. Leo stood at the back of the room, his heart pounding as he watched the courtiers file in. The Queen entered shortly after, her presence commanding the attention of everyone present. "Today is a turning point for Quelloria," she began, her voice echoing in the Grand Hall. "For too long we have been divided. Our people have struggled against one another, each seeking their own gain, each too proud to admit that we need each other. It is time for a change." Leo felt a surge of hope as he listened. This was the moment he had been waiting for. The Queen was finally ready to take the first step toward unity. "I know that many of you do not agree with my decision to allow human representatives into our court," Althea continued, her gaze sweeping across the room. "But I ask you all to set aside your fears, your doubts, and look to the future. Humanity has learned from its mistakes. They may be young, but they are not without wisdom. They are not without the will to build something better." Leo stood taller at her words, but he knew the hardest part was yet to come. He could see the skepticism in the eyes of many courtiers. Some of them were still not convinced that a partnership with humanity was the right choice. But Althea pressed on, her voice growing stronger with each word. "We have the opportunity to do something great here, not just for Quelloria, but for the entire galaxy. If we work together, if we put aside our differences, we can create a future where all species coexist in peace. We can build something that lasts for generations to come." There was a long pause. Leo held his breath, waiting for the court's reaction. Then, from the back of the room, a voice rang out. "This is madness. one of the nobles said, his voice filled with disdain. The queen speaks of unity, but how can we trust these humans? How can we trust someone who hasn't even earned their place among the stars? Althea's gaze sharpened. I did not ask for your trust, nor did I ask for your approval, she replied coolly. What I ask for is your commitment. If you are unwilling to see the potential for a united future, then you are free to leave. A murmur rippled through the room. Some courtiers exchanged nervous glances, while others seemed to grow more determined. Leo could see the queen's confidence beginning to shift the mood of the room. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was a start. After what felt like an eternity, another voice spoke up, this one softer but filled with resolve. Perhaps the queen is right, a middle-aged courtier said. We have lived in isolation for too long. Maybe it is time to open ourselves up to the possibility of something new. The tension in the room slowly began to dissipate. One by one, more courtiers began to speak in favor of the queen's vision, acknowledging that the status quo could no longer be maintained. It wasn't unanimous, but the seeds of change were being planted. Leo caught Althea's eye from across the room, a quiet smile spreading across his face. She nodded slightly, acknowledging the hard-won victory. Later that evening, after the court had dismissed, Leo found himself alone in the garden again. The air was cool, and the distant hum of the palace echoed through the trees. He had come to the gardens to think, to process the day's events. The road ahead was far from certain, and Leo knew that the hardest battles were still to come. The sound of footsteps behind him made him turn. Althea stood there, her figure outlined by the soft glow of the palace lights. She didn't speak at first, merely joining him in silence. Finally, she broke the quiet. You were right, Leo. Today was a turning point. But it's only the beginning, Leo nodded. I know, the real work starts now. Althea looked at him, her expression softer than he had ever seen it. Thank you, you've made me see things differently. Leo smiled, his heart swelling with pride. It's not just me, your majesty. It's all of us. We're in this together. For a long moment, the two of them stood there, looking up at the stars. The weight of the future hung heavy in the air. But for the first time since his arrival, Leo felt a sense of hope. The days that followed Queen Althea's address to the court were filled with tension. Though the queen had won over a number of key courtiers with her speech, the fissures in the court were far from healed. There were still those who opposed the idea of working with humanity, who believed that such alliances could jeopardize the long-standing traditions of Quelloria. The whispers in the hallways grew louder, and the once unified palace was now a place divided. Leo couldn't help but feel the weight of the situation on his shoulders. He had come here to bring peace, to build a bridge between the different factions in the galaxy. But now, it seemed as though the hardest part had only just begun. Trust was a fragile thing, and even the slightest crack could cause it to shatter. One evening, after another difficult meeting in the royal chambers, Leo found himself walking alone in the palace gardens. The night air was cool, the stars above shimmering in the deep black sky. He had learned to appreciate the quiet beauty of this place, even as the unrest within the palace grew. It was in these moments of solitude that Leo could think clearly, away from the chaos of the court. He had spent so many hours studying the situation, trying to figure out how to bring about real change. He knew that the key to unity lay not just in diplomacy, but in understanding the hearts of the people. The leaders of the court were important, but it was the people who would ultimately decide the fate of the kingdom. If the queen's vision was to succeed, it needed to be embraced by the masses, not just the elites. Leo was so deep in thought that he didn't notice Althea approaching until she was almost beside him. He turned quickly, surprised by her presence. Your Majesty, Leo said, trying to mask the tension in his voice. I didn't expect to see you out here at this hour. Althea smiled faintly, her eyes reflecting the light of the stars above. I could say the same to you. You seem to be spending a lot of time in this garden lately. Is it helping you think? Leo shrugged, his gaze drifting to the horizon. It helps. Sometimes it's the only place where I can clear my head. The court, it's difficult. It feels like we're moving forward, but there's always something pulling us back. I know what you mean, Althea said, her tone softer than usual. It's hard to convince people to change, especially when they've held onto the old ways for so long. But change is inevitable. I've always believed that. Leo turned to face her, his expression serious. Do you ever wonder if we're pushing too hard, if we're moving too quickly? People don't like change, especially when it threatens their way of life. Althea was silent for a moment as if considering his words. Then she nodded slowly. I've thought about it, Leo, every day, but I can't afford to wait. The galaxy is changing and Quelloria can't stay in the past. If I don't act now, we may lose everything. I can't let that happen. I understand, Leo said, his voice steady. But what happens if the court turns against you? What if they refuse to follow your lead? Althea looked at him with a mixture of determination and uncertainty. Then I'll have to find another way. I didn't become queen by sitting back and waiting for things to happen. If I must stand alone, I will. But I won't give up on this. Her words echoed in Leo's mind as they walked together through the gardens. He could see the weight of her responsibility, the toll it was taking on her. Queen Althea was a ruler, yes, but she was also a person, someone who carried the burden of her people's future on her shoulders. It was a responsibility Leo couldn't fully understand, but he respected it. Later that evening, Leo received word that a significant meeting had been scheduled in the royal hall. It was to be a discussion between the queen and the key factions of the court, those who had supported her vision and those who remained steadfast in their opposition. Leo knew that this was a crucial moment. This was where the future of their efforts would be decided. As he walked into the grand hall the next day, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. Courtiers were whispering among themselves, casting uncertain glances at one another. The queen had made it clear that this meeting would be a turning point, and everyone in the room knew it. Leo could feel the tension in the air, the weight of the decision that hung over them all. When Althea entered, the room fell silent. She stood tall, her presence commanding the attention of everyone in the room. There was no trace of uncertainty in her expression, only a quiet determination. I called you here today because we face a decision, Althea began, her voice steady and clear. The future of Quelloria, of all our people, depends on this decision. We cannot continue to live in isolation, divided by fear and pride. We must choose whether we are willing to work together to build something greater than ourselves. I am willing to take that step. But I cannot do it alone. There was a long silence after her words, the weight of her message sinking in. Leo stood off to the side, watching as the courtiers exchanged nervous glances. Some looked as if they were on the verge of speaking, while others were unsure of what to say. Finally, a voice rang out from the back of the room. It was the noble who had opposed the queen's speech earlier, the one who had voiced his concerns about humanity's place in the galaxy. You speak of unity, your majesty, but unity cannot come at the expense of our traditions, he said, his voice filled with conviction. We are Quellorians. Our way of life is what has kept us strong for millennia. If we abandon that, what are we left with? Althea's gaze never wavered. What we are left with, she replied evenly, is the future. The galaxy is changing, and we must change with it. If we cling to the past, we will be left behind. I will not allow that to happen. The noble sneered, his eyes narrowing. And what of our people? What of their voices? You may be the queen, but you cannot speak for everyone. We will not simply bow to your whims. The room grew tense again, the argument threatening to escalate. Leo could feel the heat of the confrontation, the emotions running high on both sides. It was clear that this wasn't just about politics. It was about pride, about identity. The queen was challenging everything these courtiers had known, and not everyone was willing to accept it. But then, unexpectedly, another voice spoke. It was a middle-aged woman, one of the more moderate courtiers who had supported the queen in her earlier speeches. I understand your fears, she said, her voice calm but firm. But we cannot ignore the reality of the situation. The galaxy is moving forward. If we stay here isolated, we risk being swallowed by the changes around us. Unity may be difficult, but it is not impossible. I believe it is the only way forward. There was a pause as the room absorbed her words. Leo could see the shift in the room's atmosphere. Slowly, one by one, other courtiers began to speak up in support of the queen's vision. Some expressed their concerns, but they also acknowledged the need for change. The tide was beginning to turn. Althea's gaze swept over the room, her expression unreadable. Thank you, she said quietly. I know this is not easy, and I know the road ahead will not be without obstacles, but today we have taken a step toward the future, and I believe it is the right step. As the meeting drew to a close, Leo felt a sense of relief wash over him. They had not won over everyone, there were still those who would resist, but they had made progress. For the first time, Leo felt like there was a real chance for Quelloria to change, for the galaxy to change. That evening, as he sat in the quiet of his chambers, Leo couldn't help but think about the road ahead. He had come to Quelloria with a mission to help bring peace and unity to the galaxy, but it was clear that the path would be far from easy. There would be setbacks, there would be opposition, and there would be moments of doubt. But Leo knew one thing for sure: he was in this for the long haul. He wasn't just fighting for Quelloria's future. He was fighting for a future where all species, all people, could come together and build something better. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't happen overnight. But if there was one thing Leo had learned in his time on Quelloria, it was that anything worth having required patience, persistence, and belief in the impossible. The weeks that followed the court's heated meeting were filled with uncertainty. Despite the progress made in the royal hall, the tension in the palace remained palpable. The factions that had initially opposed Queen Althea's vision continued to question the wisdom of working with humanity, and rumors of rebellion spread through the corridors like wildfire. Leo could feel the strain in the air. Every conversation seemed to revolve around the fragile alliance that had been formed, and every decision seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 others. The Queen's bold stance had divided the court, and though she had won over many of her supporters, she still faced fierce opposition from those who believed that the old ways were the only way forward. Leo, however, was determined to stay focused. He knew that change was never easy, and that the road to unity would be long and difficult. But the fire that had driven him to this point had not waned. If anything, it had only grown stronger. He believed in the Queen's vision for a united galaxy, and he believed that humanity could play a vital role in that future. One evening, as the sun began to set over the sprawling palace, Leo was summoned to the Queen's private chambers. He had become accustomed to these late-night meetings, times when the weight of the day's decisions needed to be shared in a quieter, more personal space. As Leo entered, he found Queen Althea standing by the window, her eyes lost in thought. The soft glow of the fading light highlighted her sharp features, making her appear both regal and weary. "Leo," she said, turning to face him, "I've been thinking about our next steps. The court's response to the alliance has been unpredictable." Leo nodded. "That's putting it mildly. Some are still pushing for a more traditional path, a path that might isolate us from the rest of the galaxy. But I think we've made progress, slowly but surely." Althea's expression softened, but there was still a trace of uncertainty in her eyes. "I worry, Leo. I worry that we're moving too fast. The people are divided, and not just the court. The outer colonies are restless. They don't trust us to lead them into a new era. I can feel the pressure mounting, and I'm afraid we may be running out of time." Leo stepped closer, trying to offer reassurance. "Your Majesty, I understand your concerns, but you've already taken the hardest step. You've stood up for a new future, one that brings us all together. The road ahead will be difficult, but it's the only way forward. You've shown your people that change is possible. You've shown them that there's hope for something better." For a moment, Althea remained silent, her gaze drifting back to the window. The weight of her responsibilities seemed to hang heavy on her shoulders. Leo knew that leading a kingdom was not an easy task, especially one as powerful and complex as Quelloria. But he also knew that Althea was capable of more than she realized. She had the strength to face the challenges ahead, even if she couldn't see it yet. "We need more time," she said quietly, "but we can't afford to waste it." Leo nodded. "Then let's find a way to bring the people together. We can start with something small, something that shows them the benefits of unity. If we can convince the people, we'll have the strength to overcome the opposition in the court." Althea looked at him, her eyes searching his face for any sign of doubt. She seemed to find none, and after a long moment she gave a small nod. "Very well, we will find a way. But it will take more than just speeches and promises. We need action." The following days were filled with preparations. The Queen called for a series of public gatherings in the outer colonies, where the unrest had been the most pronounced. These gatherings would serve as a demonstration of Quelloria's commitment to unity, a chance for the people to see the promise of change in action. Leo worked tirelessly with Althea and her advisors to organize the events, each one designed to showcase the benefits of cooperation between species. As the day of the first gathering approached, the tension in the air became almost tangible. It wasn't just the people of Quelloria who would be watching. Representatives from other planets had been invited, and their eyes were just as keen as those within the kingdom. If the event failed, it would be a disastrous setback. If it succeeded, it could set the stage for an entirely new era of cooperation. Leo stood beside Queen Althea as they watched the crowd begin to gather. The setting was beautiful, an open square surrounded by towering trees and shimmering pools. But the atmosphere was far from serene. The people were restless, uncertain. They had come to see what the Queen's vision truly meant, but they were wary, hesitant. As Althea stepped forward to address the crowd, Leo could feel his heart racing. The Queen's speech would be the first step in convincing these people that change was not only possible but necessary. He could only hope that her words would resonate. "My people," Althea began, her voice echoing across the square, "we stand at a crossroads. Our kingdom has always been strong, but we cannot survive if we continue to live in isolation. We must unite, not just for our own benefit, but for the benefit of all who call this galaxy home. Change will not come easily, but it will come, and it begins with us." Leo watched as the Queen spoke, her words powerful and filled with conviction. She was not just a ruler in this moment, she was a leader, a symbol of the hope that so many had longed for. The crowd was quiet, watching her intently, their faces filled with both hope and doubt. Then, as if on cue, a loud voice rang out from the back of the crowd. "What are you offering us, Queen Althea? What will we gain from this so-called unity?" The voice belonged to a man, one of the leaders of the opposition, who had been outspoken in his distrust of the Queen's plans. He stepped forward, his face hard and defiant. "We've heard your promises, but we've seen nothing to back them up." Words mean nothing if they're not followed by action. For a moment the crowd murmured, and Leo could feel the tension rising. The man's words were not without merit. They had seen little evidence that the Queen's vision would result in real change. But Althea didn't flinch. She stood tall, her gaze unwavering. "You're right," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Words alone will not bring change, but actions will. Today we begin to show you that unity is not just a dream, it is a reality. We will work together not just with words, but with deeds." With that, she motioned for Leo to step forward. He had known this moment was coming, but now that it was here, he felt the weight of the responsibility settle on his shoulders. He had to convince these people, to show them that unity wasn't just a lofty ideal, but something that could be built through hard work and cooperation. Leo took a deep breath and stepped forward. He knew that his words would be the turning point. Either they would convince the crowd or they would fail miserably. "We are all part of something larger than ourselves," Leo began, his voice steady. "The galaxy is vast and it's filled with diversity. But that diversity is not something to be feared, it's something to be celebrated. We have the opportunity to learn from one another, to grow together. If we do this, if we unite, we will become stronger than we ever could be alone." He paused, letting his words sink in. He could see the skepticism in some faces, but he could also see a flicker of hope in others. It wasn't much, but it was something. "Unity is not about erasing our differences," Leo continued. "It's about embracing them. It's about recognizing that each of us has something valuable to contribute. Together, we can build a future that's stronger, more prosperous, and more peaceful, and that future begins now." There was a long silence after his words, and Leo held his breath. Then slowly the crowd began to clap. It started with a few individuals, then spread until the entire square was filled with applause. It wasn't a roar of approval, but it was a start. Althea turned to Leo, her eyes meeting his with a mixture of pride and relief. They had done it. For the first time, the people of Quelloria had seen the promise of a united future, and they were beginning to believe in it. The days that followed were filled with more gatherings, more speeches, and more hard work. Slowly, the people of Quelloria began to warm to the idea of unity. The court, too, began to shift, though not without resistance. There were still those who opposed the Queen's vision, but they were becoming fewer in number. Leo knew that the battle was far from over. There would be challenges, setbacks, and moments of doubt, but he also knew that the foundation had been laid. The first step had been taken, and now there was no turning back. As he stood beside Queen Althea on the steps of the royal palace, looking out over the bustling city below, Leo couldn't help but feel a sense of hope. They were on the right path, and together they would build the future they had always dreamed of.